Hey, welcome back or welcome for the first time. To all my new listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. To all my day 1 to 67, 143, or whatever week you chose to tune in and keep listening, I genuinely appreciate you. So let me ask y'all a quick question, right? Have you ever been in a season where you know God is doing something, but you also want him to hurry up and make it happen? Like, waiting sounds really spiritual until you actually have to do it. And we love to say things like, wait on the Lord and God's timing is perfect. And all of that is true, right? But also, waiting can be frustrating. Waiting can be confusing. Waiting can be tiring. Waiting can make you question yourself or even question what you heard, right? And waiting can make you look around at everybody else's life and wonder if somehow you missed your turn. And I think one of the hardest parts about waiting is that it doesn't always feel productive, because when you're moving, planning, building, doing, or checking things off your to-do list, at least you feel like something's happening, right? But waiting can make you feel like you're sitting in the middle of a lesson that you didn't ask to take. And what's wild is sometimes the waiting season is not even dramatic from the outside. Like, people could look at your life and think everything is fine, but on the inside, you're wrestling, you're praying, you're trying to stay hopeful, you're trying not to compare yourself to others or get bitter, and you're trying not to force something open just because you're tired of waiting. And honestly, that last one is something I really struggle with sometimes, because when waiting gets uncomfortable, sometimes we want to try to create movement just to feel like we have control. Like, okay, God, I know you said wait, but, right, maybe if I just help you out a little bit, and by help, I mean fully take over, because let's be honest, sometimes our helping God is really just anxiety with a plan. And I can say that because I have done it more times than I would like to admit, right? Like, sometimes I'll be like, Lord, I trust you, while simultaneously drafting 12 backup plans just in case he needs my help, which is wild because God has never asked me to be his project manager. And what's wild about that is that's actually my job at work. But you wouldn't know that he didn't ask for my help because of the way that I try to organize the timeline. And I think that's part of what waiting exposes, because waiting exposes where we say we trust God, but still need to feel in control. It exposes what we have attached our identity to, or what we secretly believe about God's goodness. And it exposes whether we're actually surrendered or if we're just calm because things have gone the way we wanted them to, right? And honestly, waiting has a way of bringing things to the surface that movement can help us avoid. Because when you're busy, you can distract yourself. You can keep going, you can keep producing, you can keep performing. But when God has you in a waiting season, sometimes there is nowhere to hide from what is actually happening in your heart. And that's extremely uncomfortable. But I'm learning that waiting is not wasted. Even when it feels slow, even when it feels quiet, and even when it feels like nothing is happening. Regardless of how we feel, God is doing something. And sometimes he's doing something in us that's preparing us for what's next. And I know that sounds nice, but let's talk about what that actually looks like. Because sometimes waiting prepares our character, right? Because sometimes there are things we want that our character may not be ready to carry yet. And that's not an insult, that's actually protection. Because sometimes the thing we're praying for requires a version of us that has more patience, more humility, more discipline, more emotional maturity, right? More wisdom, more discernment, or more capacity. And if God gave it to us too early, it might overwhelm us instead of bless us. And that's something I've really had to sit with, because sometimes we'll think that delay means denial, but sometimes delay means development. And sometimes God is not withholding something from us, but he's preparing us so that we can actually steward it well when it comes. I know that can be annoying, and if you don't feel that way, I definitely do, because preparation rarely feels glamorous. Preparation oftentimes feels repetitive, and it feels like doing the same thing over and over again. It feels like being faithful in small areas when we want something more. It feels like learning emotional regulation when we would rather just have the answer. Or it feels like God teaching us patience in situations where we absolutely do not want to be patient. And I don't know about y'all, but I would love to learn patience in a way that does not require waiting. Like, I don't pray for patience because I know I'm going to have to go through situations that require me to be patient, right? So I wish there was like a worksheet or a seminar or just a tutorial that I could watch to learn patience, because the lived experience of waiting for things, ew. But that's usually how God develops things in us, not just through information, but through experience. Because we don't really know if we trust God until we have to trust Him in the middle of uncertainty. And you don't know if you really have patience until things don't happen on your timeline. And you don't really know if you're surrendered until you don't get your way. And that can be frustrating because sometimes waiting feels like silence. Like you're praying and you're not hearing anything new. You're asking for direction and it feels like God is saying the same thing He already said, or worse, it sometimes may feel like He's not saying anything at all. And that can bring up so many emotions like fear, confusion, disappointment, frustration, sadness, maybe anger, and even sometimes shame, because sometimes you start wondering if you did something wrong. Like, am I waiting because I messed up? Did I miss God? Did I misunderstand what He said? Or is this still going to happen, right? Should I even still be hoping for this? And I think that's where waiting can become really tender and just so tricky to navigate, because waiting does not just test your patience, it can also test your hope. And hope is such a vulnerable thing because hoping for something that you can't control requires courage, because disappointment is a real thing. And if you've been disappointed before, sometimes waiting feels scary because you don't want to get your hopes up again. And you don't want to keep believing for something and then feel foolish if it doesn't happen. And sometimes you don't want to keep praying for something that makes you feel exposed. And so sometimes instead of waiting with hope, we start waiting with emotional armor, like, okay, if it happens, it happens, but I'm cool if it doesn't. And technically that sounds calm and trusting, but sometimes it isn't really coming from a place of peace. Sometimes it's really just self-protection, or it's us trying not to care because caring feels too risky. And I get that, trust me, I do. Because when you've had to wait a long time, or when you've been disappointed in certain areas, hope can feel expensive. Like, it truly does cost something to believe again. It costs something to stay soft. It costs something to keep trusting. It costs something to not let bitterness settle in. And I think one of the things God does in waiting is He teaches us how to hold desire without letting it become an idol. And that can be difficult at times, but you can want something deeply and still not make it your God. Or you can pray for something honestly and still be surrendered. You can also care and still trust. But it takes maturity to say, God, I want this, but I want you more. And that isn't always easy, because sometimes we do really want whatever the thing is. We want the relationship, we want the opportunity, we want the healing, we want the clarity, we want the promotion, we want the home, we want the answer, we want that next step. And it's not wrong to want those things, but waiting has a way of revealing whether the desire is submitted to God or if the desire has started leading us. Because when the desire is leading, we'll force things. So we'll compromise, we'll lower standards, we'll ignore red flags, we'll overextend ourselves, or maybe even panic and compare ourselves to others. Or sometimes we start creating our own version of the promise because we're tired of waiting on God's timing. And then when we do that, we have to live with the consequences of what we force. And that's why sometimes waiting is mercy. Sometimes the closed door is mercy. Sometimes being forced to slow down is mercy. Sometimes the delay is mercy. And sometimes when God is making you sit still, it's not punishment, it's actually protection. And it's also preparation, because God sees what we cannot. So he sees what the thing requires. He sees what our heart needs. He sees what needs to heal. He sees what needs to mature. He sees what needs to be strengthened. And he sees what would happen if we got it too soon. And I think sometimes we forget that what we are asking God for may also be asking something of us. That next season that we want might require more responsibility, more consistency, more humility, more emotional health, more wisdom, more capacity, maybe even more boundaries or more obedience. So the waiting season is not just empty space. It's training ground. And I know training ground does not sound fun, because I don't like it. Like, none of us are like, Lord, please take me through a long character development season. But when you look back, you start realizing there were things you learned in the waiting that you could not have learned any other way. So you could have learned to pray differently, or how to sit with discomfort. You may learn how to hear God more clearly, or how to stop needing everybody's opinion. You could even learn how to be faithful without applause, right? Or how to celebrate other people while still waiting on your own answer. Now let's talk about that one for a second, because waiting while other people receive what we've been praying for is such a test. And that's not beginner level Christianity, right? That's an advanced placement faith, because you want to be happy for them, right? And you are happy for them, but you're also like, okay, Lord, I love this for them, but I would also love to love this for me. Like, yes, I'm clapping, but my hands are tired. And that's a very real thing. And I think sometimes we need to be honest about that without letting it turn into resentment. Like, you can be happy for someone and still feel the ache of your own waiting. Both can be true. You can celebrate them and be genuinely excited for them and still cry later because you're tired of waiting. You can be grateful what God is doing in someone else's life and still tell God, this is hard for me because you know I want that. And that doesn't make you fake, that makes you human. But the key is to not let comparison poison your waiting season, because comparison will make you resent what God is doing in someone else's life instead of trusting what God is doing in yours. And their timeline is not proof that God forgot you. And their open door is not evidence that your own door will never open. And I think it's also important to say that their blessing is not a threat to your future. And I know that sounds good, but it isn't always easy, because living that out takes work. It takes prayer, it takes honesty, and it takes letting God deal with the parts of you that feel overlooked. Because sometimes the frustration in waiting is not just about the thing we're waiting for. Sometimes it's about what the waiting is making us feel. Sometimes we feel unseen, behind, unchosen, forgotten, or even stuck. And those feelings are very real. But while those feelings are very real, those feelings are not always facts. Because you can feel forgotten, but still fully be held by God. You can feel behind and still be right on time for what God is doing in you. You can feel stuck and still be getting prepared. You can feel unseen and still be deeply known. And I think that's the encouragement that I want to give y'all, because waiting is not proof that nothing is happening. Waiting may be the very place where God is developing the version of you that can handle what you've been asking him for. And sometimes you won't realize that until later. Like, you won't immediately see how that disappointment built discernment, or you won't see how that closed door protected your peace. You may not know now that the slow season is teaching you consistency, and you might not understand now how the delay developed patience. But one day you will look back and realize how much you needed that. Not because it felt good, not because it was easy, but because it formed something in you that only waiting could do. And that's what waiting does. It forms you, it stretches you, it humbles you, it heals you, it prepares you. And sometimes the thing you're waiting for is not just about receiving what's next. Sometimes it's about becoming the person who can walk into what's next with peace, wisdom, and maturity. And that's a beautiful thing. Yes, it's annoying at times. I know that for a fact, but it's still beautiful. So if you're in a waiting season right now, I want to encourage you with this. Don't despise the preparation, and don't assume God is doing nothing just because you can't see what he's doing. Don't let the frustration convince you to force what God is still forming. And don't let comparison make you miss what he is teaching you right now. The important thing to do is ask him what this season is supposed to develop in you. Ask him what still needs healing. Ask him what needs strengthening. Ask him what needs surrendering. And ask him how to wait without becoming bitter. Because waiting well does not mean you never get frustrated. It doesn't mean you never cry. It doesn't mean that you're happy about the delay every single day. But waiting well means that you keep bringing your heart back to God in the middle of all of that. It means you keep trusting him even when you have questions. It means you keep choosing obedience even when you don't have all the details. And it means you let him prepare you instead of just begging him to hurry up. And listen, y'all, I'm literally talking to myself as I'm, saying all of this, because a lot of times I'm like, Lord, I understand the lesson, but can we graduate? Like, I get it. Character development, yep, that's cool or whatever, but can I also get my diploma, please? And yet, despite all of that, I know God is faithful, and I know he does not waste seasons. I know he's kind, and I know he sees what I cannot see. Also, I know that if he is asking me to wait, there is purpose in the waiting. So my hope and prayer for anyone listening who feels tired, frustrated, confused, disappointed, or just ready for what's next is that you would be reminded that God is still working, even here, even now, even in the quiet, even in the delay, and even in the parts that feel way too slow. And I pray you also know that when the time comes, you won't just receive what's next, you'll be ready for it. So that's what I have for y'all this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you're taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Be healthy in your relationships. I love y'all so much, and I will talk to y'all soon. Bye.